Hi, second graders. I am so excited to be able to read aloud one of my all time favorite books and a tradition in second grade. And the book is entitled Charlotte's Web. And here you see the cover page, and you see Charlotte, she's the little spider over here. And you see Fern, and she's one of the characters in the story. And there you see Wilbur and some of the other farm animals that we will see in the story. Now, the story is by E.B. White, and he is also the author of Stuart Little, and the pictures are by Garth Williams. Now, here you see the title page. Here's the title, and you'll always see the author and the illustrator as well. Oh, and also right here, the publishing company. Here is what's called the copyright page. Now I want you to look at the copyright date right here when the book was published. It was published in 1952. That was 68 years ago, boys and girls. That was a long time ago. So I want you to keep that in mind as we're reading the story, that it was published 68 years ago. And it's such a good story that it's still just as popular today. Here is the table of contents. Now here it lists, here are the titles of the chapters, and here's the page numbers that we can find them on, and all over here are the Roman numerals that are used to number the chapters, and there are 22 chapters in this story. Here we are at chapter 1. So now remember in our classroom when we do read alouds and you get cozy on the floor and you can have your snack. So if you want to do that, feel free. If you want to cozy up at the table where you're working or on your couch and you want to follow along, you can follow along if you have a copy of Charlotte's Web, or you can follow along on your device because I have the words right here. I want you to visualize, and we've talked about this a lot all year, that you were on a farm. And I want you to use your senses. What are some of the sounds that you hear? Probably a lot of, maybe a cow mooing, some other farm animals, the sounds that they make, maybe the squealing of pigs. What are some things that you see? Probably tractor equipment, maybe a big red barn, some fields. What are some things that you smell? Maybe the smell of hay or the smell of feed. I also want you to picture that inside of that farm, you are in a farmhouse where the farmer and his family lives, because that's where the first chapter of this story takes place, the beginning of the chapter. And then inside that farmhouse, I want you to think about being in the kitchen before school. And picture that the farmer's wife is making breakfast and her 2 kids are getting ready. Okay, are you ready? I am. Chapter 1, Before Breakfast. "Where's Papa going with that axe?" said Fern to her mother as they were setting the table for breakfast. "Out to the hog house," replied Mrs. Arable. "Some pigs were born last night." "Well, I don't see why he needs an axe," continued Fern, who was only 8. "Well," said her mother, "one of the pigs is a runt. It's very small and weak, and it will never amount to anything, so your father has decided to do away with it." And I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to circle the word runt. And I want you to practice using your context clues. Now, within this paragraph, can you find 1 or 2 words that can help us figure out the meaning of the vocabulary word runt? If you said small and weak, you are absolutely right. Let's continue reading. We'll start right here. "Do away with it," shrieked Fern. "You mean kill it just because it's smaller than the others?" Mrs. Arable put a pitcher of cream on the table. "Don't yell, Fern," she said. "Your father is right. The pig would probably die anyway." Fern pushed the chair out of the way and ran outdoors. The grass was wet and the earth smelled of springtime. Fern's sneakers were sopping by the time she caught up with her father. And I'm going to stop right here, and I just love this paragraph because I can really visualize, and the word choice that E.B. White uses, excellent. So they could smell springtime, almost like a day like today, and how her sneakers were sopping wet from the condensation in the grass, and we can all make a connection to that. So here's a picture of what's about to happen. And here's Fern, and here's her father, the farmer, Mr. Arable. "Please don't kill it," she sobbed. "It's unfair." Mr. Arable stopped walking. "Fern," he said gently, "you will have to learn to control yourself." "Control myself," yelled Fern. "This is a matter of life and death, and you talk about controlling myself?" Tears ran down her cheeks, and she took a hold of the axe and tried to pull it out of her father's hand. "Fern," said Mr. Arable, "I know more about raising a litter of pigs than you do. A weakling makes trouble. Now, run along." And I'm going to stop you right there. Litter means animals that are born at the same time. "But it's unfair," cried Fern. "The pig couldn't help being born small, could it? If I had been born very small at birth, would you have killed me?" Mr. Arable smiled. "Certainly not," he said, looking down at his daughter with love. "But this is different. A little girl is one thing, a runty pig is another." "I see no difference," replied Fern, still hanging onto the axe. "This is the most terrible case of injustice I've ever heard of." A queer look came over John Arable's face. He seemed almost ready to cry himself. So you can tell he's upset that his daughter's so upset. He's seeing her point of view and what she's saying to him. "All right," he said, "you go back to the house and I will bring the runt when I come in. I'll let you start it on a bottle like a baby. Then you'll see what trouble a pig can be." When Mr. Arable returned to the house half an hour later, he carried a carton under his arm. Fern was upstairs changing her sneakers. The kitchen table was set for breakfast, and the room smelled of coffee, bacon, damp plaster, and wood smoke from the stove. I can almost picture myself in the kitchen having bacon for breakfast and a cup of coffee. "Put it on the chair. Put it on her chair," said Mrs. Arable. Mr. Arable set the carton down at Fern's place. Then he walked to the sink and washed his hands and dried them on the roller towel. Fern came slowly down the stairs. Her eyes were red from crying. As she approached her chair, the carton wobbled, and there was a scratching noise. Fern looked at her father. Then she lifted the lid of the carton. There, inside, looking up at her, was the newborn pig. It was a white one. The morning light shone through its ears, turning them pink. "He's yours," said Mr. Arable, "saved from an untimely death, and may the good Lord forgive me for this foolishness." Fern couldn't take her eyes off the tiny pig. "Oh," she whispered, "oh, look at him. He's absolutely perfect." She closed the carton carefully. First she kissed her father, then she kissed her mother, then she opened the lid again, lifted the pig out, and held it against her cheek. At this moment, her brother Avery came into the room. Now, Avery's an interesting character, boys and girls, and we'll talk about him a little later. Avery was 10, and he was heavily armed, an air rifle in one hand, a wooden dagger in the other. "What's that?" he demanded. "What's Fern got?" "She's got a guest for breakfast," said Mrs. Arable. "Wash your hands and face, Avery." "Let's see it," said Avery, setting his gun down. "You call that miserable thing a pig? That's a fine specimen of a pig. He's no bigger than a white rat." Now here's a picture of Avery right here. Is this what you visualized? Seems like he's very much an outdoorsy type of kid. "Wash up and eat your breakfast, Avery," said his mother. "The school bus will be along in half an hour." "Can I have a pig too, Pop?" said Avery. "No, I only distribute pigs to early risers," said Mr. Arable. "Fern was up at daylight trying to rid the world of injustice. As a result, she now has a pig." Now, when he says trying to rid the world of injustice, he means she's trying to make things fair. A small one to be sure, but nevertheless a pig. It just shows what can happen if a person gets out of bed promptly. Let's eat." But Fern couldn't eat until her pig had a drink of milk. Mrs. Arable found a baby's nursing bottle and a rubber nipple. She poured warm milk into the bottle, fitted the nipple over the top, and handed it to Fern. "Give him his breakfast," she said. And look at Fern looking so lovingly, and Wilbur's just looking adoringly back at Fern. A minute later, Fern was seated on the floor in the corner of a kitchen with her infant between her knees, teaching it to suck from a bottle. The pig, although tiny, had a good appetite and caught on quickly. The school bus honked from the road. "Run!" commanded Mrs. Arable, taking the pig from Fern and slipping a donut into her hand. Avery grabbed his gun and another donut. The children ran out into the road and climbed into the bus. Fern took no notice of the others in the bus. She just sat and stared out of the window, thinking what a blissful world it was and how lucky she was to have an entire charge of a pig. That means she was completely in charge of it. By the time the bus reached school, Fern had named her pet, selecting the most beautiful name she could think of. "Its name is Wilbur," she whispered to herself. She was still thinking about the pig when the teacher said, "Fern, what is the capital of Pennsylvania?" "Wilbur," replied Fern dreamily. The pupils giggled. Fern blushed. And here's the word pupils, boys and girls. And can you think of a synonym for the word pupils? You're right. If you said students or classmates, you are right. So, but now that we've continued, or we've concluded chapter 1, here are some questions I want you to think about. Now you can answer them out loud. If you want to draw them in a journal, you can. So think about this question. In the beginning of the story, John Arable, now that's Fern's dad, was going to kill a baby pig that was a runt. What is a runt? Do you remember the definition? Question number 2. Explain why Mr. and Mrs. Arable believed having a runt was a problem. Why do you think they think having a runt would be a problem on a farm? What do you think? Okay, this next one is a multiple choice. How did Fern react to her father's decision? Was she A, understanding, B, upset, C, calm, or D, mystified? What do you think? Question number 4. What did Fern name her pig? A, Wilbur, B, Avery, C, Wilma, or D, John? Good job, boys and girls. And if you have some extra time today, you can illustrate either what Wilbur looks like or Fern feeding Wilbur. You can illustrate a character or your favorite part of chapter 1. Okay, thank you, boys and girls. Thank you for listening, and we will read chapter 2 next.